Now, acting President Huang said that the U.S. and the ROK have agreed to further strengthen the readiness of their alliance in response to the DPRK's growing threat by ensuring the early deployment and operation of THAAD. This is now what Vice President Pence said during the press conference.
We will continue to deploy the THAAD missile defense system as a defensive measure called for by the alliance and for the alliance.
Now, Dr. Walsh, how do you interpret Vice President Pence's words, "we will continue"? Is his statement a self-contradiction inside the Trump administration or just a soothing response to the ROK's urging for early deployment of THAAD?
I think it's posturing right now. The notion that one of the aides on that trip said that they would wait and see about deploying THAAD until the election and the new president, I think reflects two things. One, an accommodation to reality. If a new president comes into office and is absolutely opposed to the missile defense system, it's very hard to imagine politically that the U.S. is going to force its ally to accept it. So part of that is just political realism. But secondly, it also speaks to the evolving relationship between China and the United States after the summit. Obviously, China and Russia, but particularly China, have expressed their opposition to THAAD, and there seems to be some cooperation blooming in very small ways right now between the U.S. and China. And so this gives the Americans a way out, as well as a little leverage, to say, if you keep helping me, I will help you, and maybe we will slow play THAAD. So both political realism and also reflecting the changing nature of the U.S.-China relationship.
Professor Moon, what is your take on this question?
Well, I think whoever gets elected as a new president of South Korea, he should go through policy review of the deployment of American THAAD in South Korea, because now there are big debate on the procedural appropriateness of the deployment, the decision to deploy American THAAD system in South Korea. Therefore, I think new president will look into the procedural dimension of the deployment. At the same time, all those candidates were not informed about the decision to deploy American THAAD in South Korea. Therefore, new president will be looking into its military utility and its economic cost and its geopolitical implications. Therefore, I think that if we have a new president, particularly Moon Jae-in, he will look in the case, from very fresh aspect.
Now, from a technical perspective, we are really not long before the presidential election is held. That's beginning of May. Technically, if the United States and the acting government of the ROK at this moment decide to speed up the deployment of THAAD, is it possible for them to finish by that time, Dr. Walsh?
Well, I doubt it. I doubt that very seriously. And moreover, it would be a political slap in the face to the candidates who are currently running. I mean, Mr. Trump came to office wanting to reverse everything that Mr. Obama did. And certainly the likely winner of the South Korean election is going to be a liberal, more liberal than the previous president, President Park. And so he should understand that the new guy coming into office is going to want to make some changes. And they're going to have to work together, right? If the U.S. and South Korea are not on the same page, it's going to be very difficult to make progress on the problem of North Korea. So there's no, I don't think, incentive or payoff for the president to antagonize the candidates before they've even taken office. So I think it makes sense to wait the 30 days. Nothing's going to happen in 30 days. And if they try to rush it and the new president comes in and asks them to dismantle it, that's bad for everyone. That's a no win at all. So that's what I think will happen.
And Professor Moon, let me just be clear what you were saying. Basically, you are saying the plan to deploy the THAAD will be stalled anyway, as the policy will have to be reviewed after the presidential election. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, naturally, and I agree with Dr. Walsh. In other words, South Korean, new president should go through that process. Right now, some members of National Assembly are thinking about making, petition to the Constitutional Court. Some citizens are about to file for the environmental impact statement, the petition. Therefore, there could be a myriad of, the legal and procedural complaint from the civil society. Therefore, new president should accommodate look, South Korea is a country where president was impeached. Therefore, new president cannot ignore the grievances coming from the National Assembly members and the citizens.
Mm-hmm. Now, as for China's most recent response to the deployment of THAAD, let's listen to what the Foreign Ministry spokesperson had to say.
自从美韩双方决定部署萨德反导系统以后
I think everyone has noted that ever since the US and the ROK decided to deploy THAAD in the peninsula, the situation has become more tense instead of cooling down. Security in the ROK is more strained rather than more secure. Thus we urge all involved once again to stop the THAAD deployment immediately.
有关的部署进程。
Dr. Walsh, I want to come to you, and you also mentioned a little bit. Now, since the US has been pressuring China to play a central role in resolving the DPRK nuclear issue, shouldn't China's concern with the THAAD be taken into better consideration so that both sides will have some gains in working harder and cooperating better?
Well, to borrow a phrase from North Korean negotiations past, I would say action for action, word for word. In other words, of course there has to be some reciprocity. Both sides have to try to meet the needs of the other. And so this is what I think that's going to look like. I think we saw China exert some subtle pressure on North Korea over the weekend with a major Chinese newspaper floating the idea of an oil cutoff or a slowdown in oil exports, as well as obviously the temporary ban on flights to Pyongyang. So China is doing part of what the U.S. wants to do, and then China's going to expect something from the U.S. And I'm guessing one of two things, or maybe both. One is they're going to pressure the U.S. to return to the bargaining table, to have direct talks with North Korea, and secondly, to slow down or perhaps freeze the installation of the THAAD missile defense system, which China is very concerned about. Now, I'm not a big fan of THAAD, but I believe the Chinese official probably exaggerates the degree to which THAAD has affected the North Korean situation. I think if we had THAAD or no THAAD, the North Korean situation would be bad right now. You know, there are larger things going on than just THAAD. But obviously, to the Chinese, THAAD is very important. And so I would think that they will press the U.S. And it may be that this hint we had this last couple of days is a sign that there may be some accommodation to that request.
Mm-hmm. Professor Moon, picking up what Dr. Walsh was saying, putting aside China's concern about THAAD from its own strategic perspective, how do you think the THAAD system is weighing on the DPRK nuclear issue? Do you think THAAD is helping with the situation or making the DPRK going further in their escalation?
Now, once South Korea allowed the deployment of American THAAD in South Korea, then means that could imply that South Korea is not interested in dialogue and negotiation. Therefore, the so-called head-to-head in a confrontation with North Korea. Therefore, that is not desirable. Therefore, in other words, THAAD or other issues or sanctions on North Korea should be used as an instrument of bringing North Korea to negotiation table. That is the most important one. There is no other choice but to resolve North Korean problems through dialogue and negotiation. We should keep that in mind very clearly.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Walsh, my last question to you. What is your assessment of the situation at this moment? Are we closer to an outbreak of war, however long that is, or are we seeing a de-escalation of the situation?
Well, right now, I think we're at an inflection point. And often those two things happen at the same time. As things get more dangerous, there's an opportunity, people sort of focus on the problem, and it creates an opportunity to put it on a different track. So I think we've seen some positive developments, but it all depends on what lessons are learned. If the leaders in Beijing and Washington draw the correct lessons from what happened this weekend, then we might be able to put this on a positive track with negotiations and other policies. But this is very fragile, and it could easily just, begin to spiral down where we have the same old action-reaction. And if we go back to that, it could be very dangerous.
Professor Moon, what is your take on this question?
Now, there is one more observation point. There is on April 25th, that is the 85th anniversary of founding of North Korea's People's Army. And there may be a good chance that North Korea undertake the 6th nuclear testing. Then that can really screw up everything. Therefore, I really hope that North Korea would take a more, reserved posture and try to really to come back to negotiation table. Really, I think that, if North Korea undertakes a sixth nuclear testing, there may be good chance that President Trump could take a military action on North Korea. Therefore, we should try to avoid that kind of catastrophic development on the Korean Peninsula.